afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome back to another episode of ISTJ Info Dumping. Although this time around we're going to be talking more about the INTJs, and more specifically, why is it that of all the types, they get the reputation for having the worst time with romance? So bad, in fact, that Personality Page's description of the INTJ says that, quote, relationships are the Achilles heel of the INTJ. But why is that? What is it about their function stack and their demeanor that makes it so that they have so much trouble? Well, if I had to summarize it in three adjectives, it would be they're rude, oblivious, and in every single take, I have something different for the third one. So I'm just going to leave it at rude and oblivious, and maybe like if forgetful is considered different enough of an adjective, I think that's the biggest problem. But not intentionally. That's where I think it falls into more of a messy territory because it's one thing for a person to be arrogant and think that they're better than anyone else. It's another if it's legitimately something that the INTJ doesn't notice in the moment, and that, in essence, kind of makes it worse. Because at least with an arrogant person, they know what they're doing wrong, and they can come to the realization that it's wrong and make the effort to change. But if an INTJ maybe makes one mistake, learns from it, then makes another mistake, doesn't learn from it, they could keep being in this perpetual cycle of just blurting something out that's super inappropriate and not even remembering the advice that they're given. So before I continue, I want to clarify I do not intend to make this an INTJ bashing video. I know it sounds like that, but I hate to admit it, but that's just how we extroverted thinkers talk. We kind of have a bit of an edge to our voice where it sounds like we're being accusatory when really it's just we're speaking what's on our mind. I know it sounds weird to you extroverted feelers, but believe me, I am trying really hard to rein it in, trying so hard, in fact, that I deleted my previous take because I was using too many personal examples of rude things INTJs did in the past, and I thought, I don't want to tattle on my friends like that. So I thought I'd leave the personal examples to a minimum since I'm not talking about myself so much this time, and instead just discuss general patterns I've noticed that INTJs fall into and why it is that they seem to struggle so much. So first off, let's look at the function stack. First off, INTJs lead with introverted intuition, which is also the dominant function for the INFJ. Introverted intuition means that INTJs and INFJs are constantly, like almost nonstop, looking towards the future. But not just looking towards the future, but trying to figure out how a whole bunch of selective data that they've gathered can make for some kind of grand big picture type of climax. I say big picture in quotation marks because I have no clue what that means. I'm just reciting what I've read off. But to put it in layman's terms, basically they have an idea of how they want the future to be. And a lot of times the way that they talk is as though they're extremely certain that that future is going to happen. You can usually tell when someone's an INTJ or INFJ when they use a lot of absolute phrases when they're talking about an undecided future. For example, you might hear an INFJ saying, hey, when I have kids, I'm going to raise them this way. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're not even dating yet. How can you predict the woman's fertility circle or cycle that far into the relationship? If my sisters-in-law are anything to go by, trying to figure out when and how a woman can get pregnant is not as easy as you think. Some couples, it takes them several years before they have their first child. Some couples can't have children at all. So how can you know for certain when things change so much? It's examples like those that, on one hand, can make it so that INTJs and INFJs can be very reassuring, that they're so certain they're going to make their future work that it means that they don't run into some kind of emergency. But on the other hand, it can also mean that they can get a bit stubborn and that they're so confident that this future they have in mind is going to work that if something else comes along from the side to distract them, they're completely caught off guard by it because their inferior function extroverted sensing means that they have very little awareness of what's going on around them, and it typically only comes out during stress, where sometimes they can get so anxious about what's going on that they can binge their favorite food or drink or sex or whatever other physical urges they've been repressing. What does that have to do with romance? Well, I'm going to wait until I explain all the functions and then kind of tie it all together. So the second function of the INTJ, which is also the second function for the ISTJ, is extroverted thinking. This means that instead of going by their own internal logical framework, or as I like to call it, subjective logic, they try to look at what are the facts, what is actually true, what are some things that I can prove with evidence and statistics and data and empirical factual evidence that I can tangibly present and say this is the truth. There is no way you can deny it. They often rely on the collective knowledge of whoever is smart enough to be able to say it. So INTJs usually have great respect for scientists, for architects, for people that really know what they're talking about. And they love to quote various sources. They love to say, well, according to this website, according to this doctor. They don't spout out facts and trivia as much as ISTJs do, but typically speaking, they're not going to be as big on their own hunches and logical consistency as the introverted thinkers are. Then we have introverted feeling, which the ISTJ also has that as their third. This means that they are not necessarily the most showy when it comes to how they feel, although they have ways of making sure you can tell that they're emotional beings, but their range of emotional expression is very limited. So a lot of times, in my experience, INTJs have a bit of a poker face, but like too much of a poker face. They hardly emote at all. And so a lot of times it's very hard to know what they're actually feeling until they express it. This also means, on the flip side, that they have a very strong moral side that governs what they feel is right and wrong. And so this means that if they have a certain method or a morality system that makes them think this is the way it should be, they're often extremely stubborn about it and won't accept anyone else's points of view. And it can lead to them coming across as kind of obstinate and bullheaded because they'll be like, no, this is what I believe. I am not going to be swayed from it, even if you provide evidence to the contrary. Which makes it very hard to reason with an INTJ unless if you have absolute, definitive, concrete proof that their values are wrong, and even then, it can be hard. And so we're going to skip most of the other shadow functions, but the one I particularly want to focus on is the seventh, which is extroverted feeling, which yet again the ISTJ also shares this. Extroverted feeling is normally a function that the FJs and the TPs use to create harmonious situations where as many people as possible are happy and accounted for. Extroverted feelers usually put a lot of emphasis on other people's feelings and other people's emotions, and can sometimes also downplay their own emotions or even forget about them entirely for the sake of keeping the peace. But with INTJs and ISTJs, because theirs is in what's called the blind spot, this means that they have next to no awareness of other people's feelings. Instead of being arrogant and condescending about it, like the ENTJs and ESTJs are, INTJs and ISTJs are generally pretty clueless. Like, if you tell them that they were being offensive or rude, they'll be like, wait, what? We were? Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I was just talking. So a lot of times they might dress super inappropriately for the occasion and say, well, hey, it's practical. Why not? They might blurt out something that's totally taboo. They might maybe make a racist comment without thinking that it's racist. I know I've fallen into that category a few times. I don't intend to be racist, but I guess like I don't always realize if something is considered offensive or not because again, I'm just talking. Putting that all together, it tells us that INTJs are future oriented, very much into taking logical action over emotional action, but when they do use their emotions, they're often very convinced that their personal beliefs are the beliefs and everyone else's beliefs are total baloney. They also are pretty oblivious to their surroundings and what is going on around them, but are even more oblivious of how other people are feeling. Now, I should point out that the ISTJ, sharing 4 of the 8 functions of the INTJ, does have a slight advantage because ISTJs have introverted sensing, which is the 8th function for the INTJ. I've explained what introverted sensing does in the dominant so many times that I'll explain what it does in the 8th for the INTJs and also the INFJs. Introverted sensing in the 8th means that they don't really put a lot of emphasis on the past or past experiences or data that they've gathered with their 5 senses. Usually they don't like to think about past events. They don't like to compartmentalize their experiences a whole lot. In fact, they often are the most forgetful of all of the types. And some of them are so bad that they'll even forget what you literally just said to them. Or they might zone out and you'll like ask them, what do you think about that? They'll be like, huh? Oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. So as a result, instead of doing what the ISTJs do and compartmentalizing their mistakes and saying, oh, I offended that person this many years ago at this time in this place, let's not do that again. INTJs just keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and they'll say that they're sorry and they'll apologize, but then they'll just make the same mistake again because they forgot about it. What can INTJs do to be better? Well, let's get back to the 3 adjectives we said. First off, there's the rudeness element of it. Because their extroverted feeling is so low, INTJs don't put a lot of emphasis into stuff like common courtesy and etiquette because those are introverted sensing isms. Those are personal systems that have been tried and true, worked in the past, but because they're thinking about the future, that doesn't hold a lot of weight to them. So INTJs might have a habit of, say, interrupting people. They might not do table manners very well. They might sneeze into their hands or not even cover their hands when they sneeze. They might bring up a topic that no one cares about listening, but because they're not paying attention to the body expressions and the facial expressions, they're not going to register that the whole room is bored silly and they are too polite, actually having higher extroverted feeling to say, INTJ, will you shut up? No one wants to hear about that. And so as a result, because INTJs want everything to be very blunt and clear cut and expressed right away, and most other types don't do that, they're just going to keep prattling on and on about whatever it is they're interested in, and they won't be able to learn from their mistakes because the other types don't tell them that they're being rude, except for me. When I'm around my INTJ friends, I let them have it, and they like that. They often tell me that they want me to be having tough love on them because it helps them learn, but then they forget the advice that I give them after that, so that kind of defeats the point. What can an INTJ do about that to prevent them from being rude? Research. I think literally that's the only thing you can do. You have to tell them to research the proper etiquette, especially if they're dating. The proper etiquette of people's feelings and whatever the opposite gender is, figure out how he or she activates and like general patterns. Like if you're a male INTJ, look at what is it that women do not like in a man. What is it that women find turnoffs? Vice versa. If you're a woman, look at what it is that men don't like. Maybe look at what men actually think about makeup and hair shaving and all that. Maybe men don't care about that stuff and you put too much emphasis on all of that. Look into that stuff. I know you love your statistics, so do I. Believe me, we extroverted thinkers, we love our empirical data. So if you are able to make your extroverted thinking happy, you can use that to overcompensate for your extroverted feeling being so low. As far as how to fix the obliviousness, this is going to sound really painful to all of you INTJs and INFJs watching this, but there has actually been scientific evidence to prove that vocal repetition actually is very good on improving your memory. So for example, If you really want to know someone's name, they say that if you repeat it at least 3 times in conversation, that drastically increases your chances of remembering it. That's why they say that the polite thing to do when you meet someone, not just polite, but also like the logical way to remember their name further, is to say, "Oh, what's your name?" "Oh, your name is Dawn? Nice to meet you, Dawn. My name is Paul." "Oh, it was good meeting you, Dawn." See, I just said it 3 times, totally naturally, wasn't being syrupy sweet about it, and now I'm more likely to remember that this person's name is Dawn. It helps even further if you associate it with something familiar to you. So, for example, I'm going to remember the name Dawn really well because that was the name of my unpublished novel trilogy. Made a whole video about that if you guys want to check that out. So I'm going to say, "Oh, you're named after, my books." And even better, if she happens to look like someone from my books, then that furthers the connection even further. I could say, "Oh, you have black hair, just like Selena. She was one of the main characters in the books because she had black hair." Like that kind of memory by association. That's probably easier said than done with INTJs having introverted sensing down here, but it's a start. Whether they'll be any good at it, I don't know. But I have heard that there is a type of Myers-Briggs known as the 8-function model, so maybe it's possible for them to develop introverted sensing. But I think the biggest thing INTJs need to work on is when to shut their mouth. When is it more appropriate to just not say anything? Because while INTJs are introverted, oftentimes they wait until someone else asks them a question before they respond. They can get on a bit of a talking too much spree where they just have to criticize whatever is in front of them. Or if they get into something that piques their interest, which is typical introverted feeling, they're very interest driven people, they don't always know when maybe it wasn't the best time to talk about that. I admit I'm pretty guilty of that myself. When I was a kid, I was told that I talked too much about video games and no one wanted to hear about the latest game that I was playing. And so, for a while, that actually got me to develop a few problems because I thought that that meant, oh, people don't care about what I like. And so, I think that's probably subconsciously what led me to the point I am today, where when I do meet someone that shares my interests, I get really excited, but sometimes I go a little bit overboard. And I've had a couple of girls actually think that I was hitting on them when really I was just like, no, no, I wasn't hitting on you. You just like New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I like New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I was happy that we had something in common. That I think actually cost me a friendship because she thought I was hitting on her so much that she was reluctant to hang out with me because she was like, "You're acting like you have a crush on me." And I'm like, "I swear I'm not having a crush on you." Back then I thought I was asexual, so I really didn't have a crush on her. But getting back to INTJs for a moment, this can also go not just for their interests, but also for their critiques. I know I said I wouldn't give too many personal examples, but this one I feel like is particularly important because it has to do with the fact that high up extroverted thinkers, which are the TJ types, tend to come across as very overly critical of everything and kind of just blurt out whatever's on their mind. The TPs can sometimes do that as well, but at least they have extroverted feeling, so they have at least somewhat of an awareness of how other people feel, whereas the TJs are like, "Oh, we don't care. We're just going to spew it out no matter what people feel." I know of an INTJ friend of mine. This one was a female, so she had it particularly rough because INTJ females are pretty rare. She was not too happy with a policy that her boss had implemented at work. This was a conversation so long ago, I don't even remember what it was that she did at work. But her boss wasn't too happy with her after that and called her into the office and told her off for her improper conduct. And so she asked me, "What did I do wrong? I was just telling the boss that I didn't approve of his methods." And I was like, kind of doing a shaking my head type of moment, like, "Oh boy, such an INTJ-ism." And I said, "It was probably the tone of voice that got you in trouble. If you're just telling off your boss, that's not using common courtesy and etiquette. You are instead just blurting out whatever is on your mind when that's not how you're supposed to talk to a boss." And she said, "Oh." That was the problem. And it seemed like it was like a kind of a light bulb effect in her mind because it didn't even cross her mind that her tone of voice and how she expressed things to the boss might have been a bit too much in the work field. INTJs, if they are used to a job, they should also apply that to romance. If they're used to friendship, they should apply that to a job. Basically, they should use their extroverted feeling or thinking to realize that there are certain systems in place that while they may come across as very emotional and touchy-feely, they're also effective because people's emotions can affect them more than you think. INTJs may not like to admit it, but they get their feelings hurt just as much as anyone else, if not more, because they don't put a lot of emphasis on their feelings. So if they are able to look at themselves, they could do with looking at themselves literally too, because you should see how well they groom themselves, and be able to say, okay, how would I feel if someone did this to me? Sometimes I've gone to my INTJ friends and said, like, okay, how would it feel if someone just said that you were hopeless as a date? And they responded, I'd feel pretty terrible about it. And I'd say, then don't do that to other people. But then they forget that advice and end up doing it anyway. So I think the whole memory retention thing earlier might help. Studying how the opposite gender works, making sure that you really know what are turn-ons, what are turn-offs, look up the proper way to groom because, my goodness, INTJs often do not give a darn about their appearance, but appearance at least matters a little bit. INTJs that are actively searching for romantic partners, they at least have to think about their appearance a little bit. Like, if you're the type that doesn't trim your beard, at least trim it a little bit. I mean, you can grow facial hair, but try to at least make it look good. And I lost my train of thought from there, but I think I've covered most of the basics. If they can work on learning about social etiquette for the sake of achieving good results, which is what extroverted thinkers want, they want results more than they want logical consistency like the TP types do. Get good results by learning about people's feelings. Don't think that your future is necessarily going to work just because you're certain that it's going to work. Be willing to think about outside ideas. Be willing to talk to other people. See if maybe they have different perspectives. For the introverted feeling, work on expressing yourself more, but also work on realizing that other people might want to express themselves as well. So ask them, how are you doing? How are you feeling? You'd be surprised how many INTJs don't know how to ask that. And that will in turn make you more popular. Realize or start to read like books and scientific articles about body language so that it can overcompensate for your low sensing. Ask people, how are they doing? Are you okay? Is something bothering you? Did I offend you? That's what I do. Seems to work. So hopefully the INTJs can try to do that to compensate for their extroverted feeling being so low. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if perhaps you're an INTJ and you want to give tips to other INTJs. If you're not an INTJ, do you relate to any of their struggles and how have you been able to overcome this? Do you have advice for INTJs that maybe I've missed? If you're an INTJ who has fallen into some of these pitfalls, have I been able to be informative to you? Either way, let me know. I love reading the comments. Special thanks to my patrons Matthew Rakowski, Spoon Ghost, and Splatcat for their financial contributions. Thank you for actually using extroverted feeling to realize that I'm in need and being willing to support me through your abundance. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.